The channel opened without warning. No handshake. No greeting protocol. No diplomatic courtesy ping the way Earth's monitoring systems had been trained to expect from any registered vessel crossing the inner system perimeter. Just a sharp carrier wave cutting through the standard comm traffic, then a voice that arrived through the translation bead on Commander Sarah Voss's console, with the particular quality of something that had never once needed to ask permission before it spoke. Attention, inhabitants of the third planet. This is Ambassador Vrel, of the Galactic Sovereignty, representing the High Council of 47 member civilizations. You are being extended a formal offer of protection. You have 72 hours to accept. Failure to respond will be interpreted as refusal, and refusal carries its own consequence. Sarah looked at the transmission feed on the secondary screen to her left. 14 ships sitting at the edge of the solar system, arranged in a formation that was almost certainly designed to communicate something impressive. She counted them the way she counted anything she had not requested and did not want, methodically, without expression, the kind of counting that went straight to a specific corner of the brain and stayed there until a form required it. She picked up her coffee mug. It was empty. She set it down. "Patch me through," she said. Lieutenant Dara Cole, 26 years old, and 3 weeks into her first posting on Orbital Defense Station 7, looked up from her console, with the expression of someone who had not yet learned which sentences were better left unfinished. "Commander, protocol says we escalate to Central Command before initiating direct contact with an unregistered foreign vessel operating inside the—" "Patch me through, Cole." Cole patched her through. Sarah leaned forward toward the transmission rig. "Ambassador Vrel, this is Commander Sarah Voss, Earth Orbital Defense Station 7. I received your message. I have a few questions, if you have a moment." A pause from the other end. Then Vrel's voice again, carried through the translation bead with a half-beat echo, as though someone was reading a transcript of the words a fraction of a second after they were actually spoken. "Commander, we did not expect a response at this tier of your command hierarchy." "This tier of my command hierarchy is what you get at this hour," Sarah said. "Question 1. You said protection. Protection from what, specifically?" Another pause. Longer this time. Like the question had not been in the prepared script. "From the threats inherent to unaffiliated space. From civilizations that would seek to exploit your resources, your population, your developing technology. The sovereignty provides a shield. In exchange, Earth registers as a protectorate and observes sovereignty law within its own system boundaries. It is a generous arrangement, and one that has served many civilizations well." Question 2, Sarah said. She was watching the visual feed from Vrel's transmission. He stood in what appeared to be a formal command chamber, with curved walls and light that came from angles she could not quite locate. 2 aides flanked him on either side. Vrel himself was taller than her initial estimate, wearing a robe of deep blue crossed by a wide sash running from his left shoulder to his right hip. The sash was covered in small metallic symbols arranged in patterns that caught the light in ways that were clearly deliberate. "That sash. What does it signify?" Cole made a sound. She converted it efficiently into something that could pass as a cough. Vrel considered the question briefly, like his translation system was checking whether it had accurately received something that unusual. "It is the sash of first address. It is worn by sovereignty ambassadors when delivering formal civilization-level communications. It represents 700 years of diplomatic history and the full authority of the High Council in all matters of first contact with emerging species." Sarah looked at it. Wide, decorated, ceremonial, designed to impress the recipient with the weight of the institution behind the man wearing it. It was, structurally, a participation ribbon. A very expensive, 700-year-old participation ribbon, worn by a man who was at this moment explaining to a species he had never encountered that they needed his organization's assistance to survive in a universe they had been occupying without his knowledge for the entirety of their recorded existence. "Understood," she said. "We'll be in touch within your 72-hour window. Voss out." She closed the channel. Cole was looking at her. The expression on her face was the kind that had too much to manage to maintain a clean professional surface over all of it. "Commander, 14 ships. I counted them. They're not Earth registry. I noticed. Their drive signatures don't match anything in our classification database. Their energy output suggests technology significantly beyond." "Cole, Yes, Commander. What do we do? She was already standing and walking to the window. The window in the main operations room ran the full length of one wall, and Earth curved below the station in the blue and white way it always did at this point in the rotation cycle. She had been looking at Earth from windows on various stations and various postings for 13 years. It always looked the same. Enormous, unhurried, entirely unaware that anything outside it had developed an opinion about its future. "We call Central Command," she said. "We file the incident report. We request a briefing authorization, a full transmission log review, and a classification assessment on those 14 signatures." She paused. "And someone gets the coffee machine fixed. It has been broken for 2 weeks. I am not asking again after this one." "I'll submit another maintenance request," Cole said, turning back to her console. "You've submitted 3. 4 then. There is an urgency box on the form. Use it. Write a note in the supporting documentation field." She turned from the window and sat back at her console. Cole was already pulling up the incident report form. The cursor sat blinking in the classification field at the top of the page. "What category?" Cole asked. Her voice was careful in the way that meant she already had a guess, and was not certain it was right. Sarah looked at the transmission feed. The 14 ships were still there in their formation, still as patient and certain as they had been 90 seconds ago when the channel opened. They had traveled from somewhere outside the solar system. They had delivered a formal ultimatum. They were waiting for a planet to decide it needed help surviving. "Diplomatic contact, first order," she said. "Category, routine." Cole looked up. "Routine. Category routine," Sarah said again. Her voice was exactly the same both times. Central Command's response arrived in 40 minutes. A full authorization packet. A briefing code that unlocked 3 new database tiers. 3 separate officials, each sending an identically worded message from different departments, all instructing Sarah to do nothing, say nothing, and wait for the senior diplomatic team to arrive from Geneva. The senior team was 11 hours away. She filed all 3 identical messages in the same folder. She labeled it, "Noted." For the next 4 hours, she read everything available. The Deep Space Monitoring Network had been tracking the Sovereignty fleet for 11 days, since it first crossed the heliopause. 11 days of sensor logs, energy signature tracking, course projections, and communications intercept attempts that had produced mostly dense static, with occasional patterns the analytics team had been unable to decode before the fleet resolved the problem by transmitting in a format Earth's systems could simply receive. The fleet had not moved aggressively at any point in those 11 days, had not powered weapons in any configuration her systems recognized as combat-ready, had traveled at a steady, unhurried pace, stopping at the inner system boundary to transmit their message, and then sitting, patient, waiting, the way things waited when they believed the outcome was already decided. 14 ships. She kept returning to that number. Not because 14 was a large number. It was not. She had seen larger numbers used for far less. What held her attention was what the number said about the people who had chosen it. You sent what you believed was sufficient. The number was not about raw power. It was about expectation. Someone had assessed Earth and concluded that 14 was enough, and that confidence was a data point about the assessment. By the time Dara Cole brought her a cup of tea, because the coffee machine was still broken and the replacement parts were on order from somewhere with an unclear timeline, Vrel had transmitted a second message. Polite, formal. A gentle reminder that 68 hours remained. Unhurried. The tone of something that had issued this offer before, and received, every time, the response it anticipated. Sarah sat with the tea, and let it cool before drinking it. "They think we're going to be surprised," Cole said. She had sat down across from Sarah, in the small break area just off the main operations deck, and her face was doing what 26-year-old faces did when there was more happening than the professional surface could comfortably manage. "Most people are surprised," Sarah said. "But we're not." "We picked them up at the heliopause 11 days ago," Sarah said. 11 days of data. Command knew before I did. Command always knows." Cole considered this. "So why specifically you?" Sarah thought about how to answer. Simple answers sometimes required care about where they started. "Because I don't get surprised," she said. "And because they want the initial calls made without a clear paper trail of exactly who made them. Cole nodded slowly, clarity settling in over the surface of things she had not fully understood when she accepted this posting. What do they actually want? She asked. Not the version in the transmission. Sarah stood, walked to the window again. The sun was on the far side of Earth from this angle, and the planet's edge was lit in a thin gold line all the way around the visible curve. 3 weather systems rotating independently in the southern hemisphere, each one vast, each at its own pace, none of them aware of the others, and none of them aware of 14 ships at the system boundary running down from 72 hours. What everyone wants, she said. A predictable outcome. She turned. Get me the engagement doctrine file. Full classification, 7 and above. That level requires a specific. I have the authorization. Second packet from command, bottom of the list. She picked up the empty coffee mug by habit and set it back down. And follow up on that machine, urgency box, supporting documentation. She was going to keep asking. They both understood that. But it was something to do while she waited for the planet to keep turning, and for 11 hours to pass, and for the world to stay exactly as enormous and unruffled as it always had been. She opened the engagement doctrine file and started reading. She had read most of it before. She read it again. It was the kind of document that returned different things depending on what you brought to it, and she had never brought quite this to it before. She read until the tea was cold. She drank the cold tea. She kept reading. When she finished, she had a blank transmission form open in a second window. She typed, Ambassador Vrel, Commander Voss, we have some things to discuss. She pressed send. Then she looked at the 14 ships on the feed and thought, he called us pre-conflict. I looked at those 14 ships and thought, buddy, we haven't even started the paperwork. The senior diplomatic team arrived from Geneva in 9 hours and 40 minutes. Faster than the 11 hours they had promised, which was a small but meaningful signal. Someone at the central coordination level had looked at the situation and concluded the window for managing it from above was narrowing more quickly than the initial schedule assumed. Sarah noted it without mentioning it. She was at the docking bay when they came through. 3 people in the kind of clothes that communicated authority without using uniforms, which was itself a kind of uniform, one that required more maintenance than the straightforward version and carried different implications. Lead diplomat was Oliver Crane, somewhere in his middle 50s, silver-haired, with the expression of someone who had spent a long career being the calmest person in every room they entered, and had gradually come to treat calmness and control as the same thing. They were not the same thing. Behind Crane was Grace Neely, who processed information as it arrived, rather than waiting for someone to organize it for her. Her tablet was open before she cleared the docking threshold. Behind Grace was Patrick Osei, who had the posture of a person who had spent years being the most informed individual in a room, while being professionally required to let someone else speak first. He was very good at it. That was not the same as it being easy. Commander Voss, Crane said, extending his hand. I've read your incident report. Very lean. That's the idea, Sarah said. You made direct contact with the ambassador before authorization cleared. I asked if he wanted coffee, she said, already walking. They followed. He did not understand coffee. That is in the report. Crane filed the coffee comment behind his expression and matched her pace. The station corridor ran at 94% gravity, and new arrivals always adjusted their stride in the first 100 meters without realizing they were doing it. Sarah had stopped noticing years ago. The sovereignty is not new to our intelligence picture, Crane said. We have had background information on their existence for 6 years. Nothing confirmable. Nothing we could build formal policy around. This is the first direct contact. I know, Sarah said. He glanced sideways at her. You know, Clearance 7 access includes the preliminary contact scenario documentation in the doctrine file. It is a short section, but it is present. You read the full doctrine file. Twice. Once when I received the clearance. Again, 2 nights ago. Crane absorbed this. The section on probable contact scenarios. What did it say about the expected profile of first contact? That the initiating party would present from a position of assumed superiority, she said. That they would offer something framed as protection rather than alliance. That the window given would be short enough to feel urgent, but long enough to feel considered. She pushed open the briefing room door. It was an accurate prediction, The coffee machine in here is broken. I want that in the operational log. The briefing room had a window along one full wall, Earth framed in it, the way it always was at this point in the station's rotation cycle. Crane and his team settled at the table. Cole was already present. Sarah had arranged that without asking anyone's permission, because Cole was the right person to have in the room and someone had to decide that. Seated against the wall with her tablet across her knees, and her attention quietly distributed between the room and the doorway. Grace Neely was already reading from her screen before she had fully sat down. 63 hours remaining in the window. The Sovereignty fleet has not changed position. 2 follow-up transmissions after initial contact, both formally polite in register, same channel as the original. Polite, Patrick Osei said. The word had weight on it. They are not worried about our answer, Sarah said. Everyone looked at her. Polite in this context is a confidence signal. When you are genuinely uncertain about how someone will respond, you push. You add conditions. You send a message that carries urgency. They are polite because they believe they already know what we are going to say. What are we going to say? Crane asked. We are going to read them a number, Sarah said. But first I want to establish the current picture clearly. She took the chair at the side of the table rather than the head, because this was formally Crane's briefing, and she was operating within his authority structure. He noted where she sat. She was aware that he noted it. The Sovereignty sent 14 ships, she said. 14 is not an impressive number by any meaningful standard. It is, however, a confident number. You send what you believe is sufficient. They assessed Earth and concluded 14 was sufficient. That conclusion is wrong. I want to correct it. Crane folded his hands on the table. Commander, I want to be direct with you, since that appears to be the register you work in. The Sovereignty represents 47 civilizations. Their technology exceeds ours in several measurable categories. Propulsion, energy systems, weapons configurations our analysts were unable to fully classify. There is a reasonable argument that positioning ourselves in opposition to their offer is not our most advantageous opening. I am not proposing opposition, Sarah said. I am proposing accuracy. There is a meaningful difference. There is always a meaningful difference between making a threat and telling someone the truth about what you are. Crane looked at her. What truth are you proposing to tell them? She stood and walked to the window. Earth turned. 3 cloud systems visible in the southern hemisphere, each vast and independent. The thin gold line where the sun was hitting the planet's edge. The vast blue quiet of something that had been here before everything in this room, and would be here after all of it. Article 7 of the Engagement Doctrine includes an aggregate figure, she said. Every nation, every defense structure, every registration, active military, reserve designations, civilian programs, regional frameworks, every organized human defense structure that has ever filed paperwork, combined into one number. She turned. I want to read it to Vrel. Crane looked at Osei. Osei looked at the screen. Grace Neely's eyes moved to the display board and stayed there. Pull it up, Sarah said. Current quarter. Osei looked at Crane. The smallest possible nod from Crane. Osei typed. The number appeared on the room's display board. Neely made a very small sound, the involuntary kind that comes when arithmetic arrives differently than expected. The number was not theatrical. It did not announce itself. It sat there with its commas in the correct positions, representing every registered human being across every nation, in every form of organized defense structure that had ever generated a record. That is a very large number, Crane said. It is the correct number, Sarah said. Crane continued looking at the display. The Sovereignty is going to request verification. We will provide full documentation. We have it all. They will question the methodology. We will explain the methodology. It is completely documented, and has been since the registry was first consolidated. Commander. Mr. Crane. Not hard. Not elevated. Precise. The number is real. Every category in it is real and verifiable. We are not performing anything. We are not inventing anything. We are providing accurate information that the Sovereignty failed to obtain before they arrived at our perimeter, with a formal ultimatum and a 72-hour window. She looked at him steadily. I need authorization to read it to them. Crane stood. He walked to the window. He stood there looking at the planet. She let him stand. Some people needed to look at something large before they could make a decision that matched the scale of the situation. That was a reasonable requirement, and she had no argument with it. The planet turned below. After a while, Crane said, "What happens when they hear it?" "Silence," she said. "Then internal consultation." And after the consultation, she looked at the edge of the solar system, where 14 ships were counting down from something they were very certain about. They asked better questions. Crane exhaled. The controlled kind. A decision settling. "Set up the channel. I'll be on it with you." "You can be on it," she said. I read the number. A pause. "Why does that matter?" "Your title is better for the formal diplomatic record. My voice is better for this specific moment." She did not elaborate further. It was a tone issue, and a presence issue, and explaining those things in detail rarely helped them. He looked at her for a moment. "Fine." The channel authorization took 20 minutes. The required header form had 3 approval stages, and 2 of those needed manual authorization from officials who were managing other issues simultaneously. Sarah walked 2 corridors to the smaller functioning coffee machine, poured a cup that came out too hot, and stood in the corridor drinking it, while the approvals processed. She was still holding the cup when the channel finally opened. Ambassador Vrel. Commander Voss. He was there in the feed, sash in place. The same 2 aides. The chamber slightly darker than in the first transmission. "I have a number I would like to share with you." His translated voice came back. A number. Article 7 of Earth's Engagement Doctrine includes an aggregate figure. It represents the total count of human beings currently registered under any form of organized defense structure across all Earth nations. I am going to read it to you now. She read it. The number. Nothing around it. No context. No framing. No strategic preamble. The number existing in the channel, the way a large true thing existed, without apology. Silence from Vrel's end. Not the measured silence of a diplomat selecting precise language. A different kind. The kind that came from a room full of people who had stopped doing everything else to do the same calculation at the same time. Crane leaned toward his microphone. "Ambassador, we are prepared to provide full supporting documentation at your request." More silence. Then Vrel's voice, and the register had changed from the first transmission. The prepared formality was gone. Something with more texture had replaced it. "That number. Is it current data?" "This quarter," Sarah said. "It is not consistent with our assessment of your developmental stage." "Your assessment of our developmental stage," Sarah said, "was built on incomplete information." A pause. "Then, we will need to consult internally." "Of course," Crane said. "We will be here." The channel closed. The room was quiet. Cole had both hands flat on her knees. Osei had put his tablet down and was looking at the middle distance without appearing to see it. Neely was looking at her screen with the vacant focus of someone who had stopped processing new input because the existing input was still processing. "They went quiet," Cole said. "Yes," Sarah said. She drank her coffee. Still too hot. She drank it anyway, without reacting to the temperature, because the temperature was not the relevant thing. Crane turned from the window. His expression had something revised in it, not skeptical the way it had been. Something adjusted. "How long have you known that number would produce that response?" "Since the first time I read the doctrine file," she said. "The number is not classified. Anyone with access to Earth's public defense disclosures can calculate it if they know which categories to combine." The sovereignty looked at us and counted the parts they could see. They did not count everything. "Nobody counts everything," Osei said, not directing it at anyone. "We do," Sarah said. She pulled up Form 7 Delta on her console. Resource allocation. Under Sovereign Engagement Protocol. She had downloaded it 2 nights ago, on the principle that had governed her through the entire situation so far. Do the paperwork before you need it. She opened Field 1, and began. The coffee was still too hot. She kept going. 61 hours left in the window. She was not tracking the window. She was thinking about the probe, because she already knew one was coming. She had recognized the fleet formation from the first sensor data as reconnaissance-weighted rather than combat-oriented. They had made their initial assessment from a distance, and the number had contradicted that assessment, and the next operational move was to send something into the system to look more closely. She wanted to see what it found, and she already knew most of what it was going to find. Field 2, Field 3, Field 4. The Kuiper Belt facility had been operational for 11 years. It was the kind of large that happened quietly when the people building it had a long timeline and no reason to announce the progress. The probe's AI was going to encounter the facility's output and attempt to classify it. The classification was going to present the sovereignty's analysts with a problem they had not expected to be assigned. She thought the word the AI would settle on was probably ongoing. She thought that was accurate and would remain accurate for the foreseeable future. Field 5, Field 6, Field 7. The silence from the sovereignty fleet extended through the rest of the operational day and into the next cycle, long and patient and full of math being done on the other end. She led it. She had 47 fields, and she was going to fill all of them. The silence stretched. The planet turned. She kept working. The probe crossed the outer system perimeter 17 hours after Vrel went quiet. Cole flagged it the moment it appeared on the primary sensor board. Standard reconnaissance configuration, small profile, sovereignty drive signature matching the fleet at the boundary, moving on a careful heading at a speed that was probably described in its operational order as subtle and low detection. It came in on an angle that avoided the main orbital traffic corridors, which was considerate and which also did not particularly matter, because the main corridors were not where the most significant things were. Sarah was at her console completing Field 39 of Form 7 Delta, when Cole said, "We have a visitor." Sarah looked at the sensor feed without leaning back. The probe was running minimum active emissions, the profile designed for extended range operation with reduced detection likelihood. It was a well-designed probe. She noted that the same way she noted anything that required updating a prior assumption, accurately and without making a production of it. "Send a transit notification," she said. Cole looked at her. "We are informing them that we see it?" Transit notification is standard protocol for any unregistered object that crosses the inner system boundary, Sarah said. "It is not a challenge, it is not a hostile act. It is a courtesy, and it is logged in our operational record." She looked back at her form. "Log it and send it." Cole sent it. No response came back from the probe, which was entirely expected. Probes did not respond. Their entire design was to collect, not to communicate. Field 39 required cross-referencing 3 classified documents, 2 of which needed to be formally requested from a database that was not directly accessible from her console. She submitted the request, received an automated acknowledgement, estimating 4 to 6 hours for processing, set the form aside, and pulled up the probe's projected trajectory on the secondary screen. She traced it with one finger on the display. Mars first. Mars had infrastructure and operational presence at a scale that most people outside a specific clearance level were not aware existed, and the probe would encounter some of it and find it difficult to contextualize against whatever baseline assessment the sovereignty had built of human civilization. Then the asteroid belt, which had more active human operation in it than its exterior appearance suggested. Then Earth and the lunar installations, which were the obvious targets for any intelligence-gathering pass. Then, on its projected outward heading, through the outer system and toward the Kuiper Belt. She thought about the Kuiper Belt facility. 11 years of construction and continuous operation, built and maintained by people who had been given a long timeline and told that long-term meant you did not discuss the progress with people outside the program. The facility was very large and fully operational, and it produced the kind of output that overwhelmed standard sensor suites attempting to read it from approach distance. A probe's AI encountering the facility would face a signal environment too dense and too active to resolve into organized data. It would classify what it found using whatever term its vocabulary had for something its processing capacity could not cleanly handle. She expected the term would be ongoing. She thought that was probably the most accurate available word. Cole came by with tea. The small coffee machine 2 corridors over had run through its pod supply. Sarah accepted the tea without commenting on the situation, because commenting on it had not moved the situation forward, and she had noted that pattern. "They are going to find a significant amount," Cole said. She was standing at the work area's edge rather than sitting, which was her way of indicating she was present for a conversation, but not committed to its length. "They will see some things," Sarah said. "The defense platforms, the manufacturing output in the belt. Some of those. Mars. What the probe can resolve on Mars. The shipyard. Cole said. When it gets to the outer system, the probe's AI will encounter the facility's operational output and have trouble processing it, Sarah said. We will see what comes back. And the Kepler debris field, Cole said. She said it carefully, the same way you said something you were not entirely certain you had standing to bring up. Sarah's hand, holding the tea, did not change position. I know. The energy signatures have been there for 6 years. They do not degrade on any timeline relevant to this probe's sensor resolution. I know, Sarah said. The break area was quiet around them. The station's ambient system hum was a constant low presence that you stopped hearing after enough time, the way you stopped feeling the adjusted gravity. They are going to ask what happened there, Cole said. Sarah set the tea down. She looked at the trajectory on her screen. The debris field was distributed across a broad area of the middle system, most individual objects too small for visual register at operational distance. But the energy signatures that had been produced 6 years ago were not small, and they did not move. They were as readable now as the day they were made, to any sensor system sophisticated enough to read them. The Sovereignty's probe was sophisticated enough. She had assumed that from the first analysis of its approach profile, the Kepler engagement had happened because an assessment was wrong. The assessment said 12 minutes. The reality was 4. The gap between 12 minutes and 4 minutes was the shape of everything she had not been able to do in the time she did not have. And that gap had a form now, a location, a set of energy signatures that sat in the middle system, as permanent as math. She had written the incident report. The word navigational appeared in it twice. She had looked at the second occurrence for a long time before she submitted the file. Then she had submitted it, because the report was not written for her. She had not opened the file since. When they ask, Cole said, her voice level and careful, what will you tell them? Sarah looked at the trajectory. Navigational incident, she said, flat, even, the same as the report. The door stayed closed. She did not apologize for it. Vrel was going to hear those words, and they were going to be the same words she had written 6 years ago, and they were going to be the only version she had available. Cole did not push it. She had learned what to do with closed doors. The probe moved through the inner system over the following hours, quiet and methodical and thorough. Sarah worked through her form queue. When the access request cleared for the cross-reference documents, she completed field 39 and moved to 40. Crane held calls with Geneva behind the briefing room wall. Osei knocked on her doorframe once, asked if she needed anything. She said no and meant it. Neely sent a message requesting a summary of the probe's projected data return, and Sarah produced one and sent it back in 4 minutes, because Neely was doing her job well and deserved a fast answer. At the 4-hour mark, the probe reached the Kepler debris field. Sarah watched it through the lens of her own station's sensors, which tracked the probe tracking the field. She could not access the probe's internal data. It transmitted directly to the Sovereignty fleet, but she could observe her own equipment's response to the probe's active scanning, which provided a usable picture of what the probe was looking at and how long it was looking. The debris field registered on her sensors exactly as it always had. 6 years and the signatures had not shifted a fraction. The probe held position in the field for 11 minutes. A standard transit scan would have taken 2 to 3. The additional 8 minutes meant it had been specifically tasked to investigate the site, which meant someone in the Sovereignty's chain of analysis had flagged the field from earlier long-range passive scans and wanted a close reading. They had been paying attention longer than she had assumed. She made a note of that. Then the probe moved on, carrying its data toward the outer system, and Sarah returned to her form. Field 40, Field 41. The document access had cleared, and Field 39 was done, and the form was moving forward, the way forms moved when you did not stop working them. The probe reached the outer system 6 hours later. Sarah was 2 corridors over at the small machine when Cole's voice came through the intercom. The voice was doing something specific and controlled, not alarm, which had a distinctive rising quality she knew well, but something more deliberate than alarm. Careful. Even. Commander, the probe's transmission signal has dropped. She walked back to the operations deck, cup in hand. Dropped or cut? Neither. It was transmitting normally. The signal degraded progressively, and then stopped. No weapon signature in the sensor data. No collision alert. The probe appears physically intact from what our sensors can read on this end. The facility, Sarah said. The operational output from the facility at full capacity. The probe's standard AI processing system might not be able to filter that environment into usable data. There are too many simultaneous signals across too many frequency ranges. The probe is not destroyed, Sarah said. She sat down at her console. It is overwhelmed by the signal environment. Note the distinction in the log and flag it. The probe will compile what it can and resume transmission when its processing catches up. And when it does, Cole said, Vrel will have the data. Yes. Even partial data from the facility is going to be significant. Probably, Sarah said. She looked at Field 46, the most structurally complex on the form. She read the directions 3 times, then started. Field 46. Field 47. She reviewed the completed form. Transposed reference number in Field 12. She corrected it, submitted. The form accepted. She closed it and opened the next one. The queue had shrunk by 1, 3 remaining. She opened the next one. While a database authorization processed, she pulled up the observation bay maintenance request. The hairline crack in the lower left corner of the window had been sitting at low priority for 3 weeks. She upgraded it to medium and wrote a supporting structural justification in enough detail that downgrading it would require a written counter-argument from the technician team. She submitted that too. When things slowed down, there was time for things she had been meaning to do. Osei came by during the second operational cycle and left a sandwich on the corner of her console without speaking. She ate it without looking at the contents. It was food, and her body needed food. She kept working. By the time Vrel's next transmission came in, she had cleared the queue to 3 outstanding items, submitted the urgency-level maintenance documentation for the coffee machine, and started the preliminary paperwork for the Kuiper Belt facility's updated classification status under a potential new treaty framework. She started it not because anything was settled yet, but because when something settled, the paperwork had to be ready. The sovereignty was quiet for 31 hours total. She used every one of them. 6 hours into the probe's silence, Crane appeared at her doorframe. He did not knock the way Osei did. He stood at the threshold in a way that indicated he expected to be noticed, which he was. Sarah finished the sentence she was typing before she looked up. "The probe is still dark," he said. "Yes. Our analysis team is working on what that means. It means the facility's operational output is too large for the probe's AI to organize into a readable signal," Sarah said. "I covered this with Cole 4 hours ago." Crane came into the room. He did not sit. He stood near the console with his hands in his pockets, which was the body language of someone who had something to say and was deciding whether to say it directly or approach it from an angle. She waited. "How large is the facility?" he asked. "Large," she said. He looked at her. "That is not a number. I will send you the classification level required to access the number," she said. "It is above your current authorization. I can put the request through if you want it." He absorbed this. The sovereignty is going to have questions about it. I expect they will have several questions about several things. Are you ready for those questions? Sarah looked at Field 41 on her screen. She had been working through the form in the quiet hours of the second operational cycle, and the form was moving forward, the way forms moved when you did not stop. "I am ready for them," she said. "Were you planning to ask me something? Or were you planning to stand in my office until I asked you what was happening?" Something changed in Crane's expression. Not offense. Something more like recalibration. He sat down in the chair across from her console, which meant he had decided on the direct approach. "I have been in diplomatic work for 23 years, he said. "I have managed first contact protocols on 3 separate occasions. All 3 were with species that we approached. This is the first time we have been on the receiving end." "I understand," she said. "What I have noticed, in 23 years, is that the party being approached usually has a disadvantage in the first conversation. They are reactive. They are working with less information. The approaching party has had time to study the subject, to build a framework, to arrive prepared." He paused. "We were reactive in the first conversation. You made us less reactive than we would have been, but I want to make sure we are in front of the next conversation, not behind it." Sarah set her stylus down. She looked at Crane with a different attention than she had been giving him. He was not the same person he had been when he came off the docking transport. Or rather, He was the same person, but she was reading him more accurately now. "The next conversation is going to be about the probe data," she said. "They will come back with specific questions about specific things the probe found. The debris field, the facility, the manufacturing signatures in the belt, the Mars infrastructure, whatever portion of it their sensors resolved. And the defense registry number," Crane said. "They will want to discuss that further." "Yes." "What is the position when they push back on the registry figure?" "We maintain it," Sarah said. "It is accurate. Every component is documented and verifiable. If they want documentation, we provide it. If they want a methodology walkthrough, we provide that. The number does not change because they find it large." Crane nodded slowly. "What about the Kepler debris field?" The room was quiet. "That is a navigational incident," Sarah said. He looked at her. She looked back. The door was closed, and she was not going to explain the door. "Understood," he said, after a moment. "I want you to know that I am not here to manage you. I came in with a framework, and the framework was incomplete. I am revising it." "That is a reasonable thing to do when the data changes," Sarah said. He stood. "I will be in the briefing room. Osei is running projections on what the probe data is going to show. If you have a moment when your form is complete, I would like your read on the projections." "When the form is complete," she said. He left. She looked at Field 41. She finished it. She went to the briefing room. Osei's projections were good. He had accessed everything available at his clearance level and built a model of what the probe's sensor suite could reasonably have captured across the inner system, and what it would likely attempt to capture in the outer system, before the facility overwhelmed its processing capacity. The model was accurate in most respects, and had one significant gap that she identified, and that he, when she pointed to it, confirmed he had already flagged as a gap, but could not fill without a higher clearance tier. She put in the authorization request for him. They went through the projections together for 90 minutes. Neely contributed precision to the timeline estimates. Crane listened more than he spoke, which was how she knew the framework revision was genuinely underway. Then she went back to her console and finished the form queue. The probe remained silent for the rest of the waiting period, its AI working through whatever it could compile from the facility's signal environment, preparing to resume transmission when it had something organized enough to send. The Sovereignty went quiet for 31 hours total. She used all of them. She used all of them. The call came in at hour 31. Not a courtesy status update. Not a polite reminder that the window was counting down. A Level 3 diplomatic contact request. Sovereignty code. A different designation from everything they had sent before. Level 1 was notification. Level 2 was follow-up. Level 3 meant both parties were present for a genuine exchange. Cole flagged it from the comm station. Her voice had a quality Sarah had not heard from her before. Not quite excitement, which was the wrong thing for the situation. The operational version of it. The way a person sounded when they recognized that something had shifted, and the shift was significant. Level 3 contact request. They changed the designation from the previous transmissions. "Set up the full channel," Sarah said. "Get Crane." Crane arrived in under 2 minutes. He had been in the briefing room. Neely and Osei were right behind him, which meant the briefing room had become the place where the team was. The past 31 hours had not been idle for anyone. They arranged themselves at the console, Sarah at the center, Crane beside her, Neely and Osei on the flanks, Cole at her station against the wall. The room had the specific quality of people who had been waiting for a thing and were no longer waiting, and the tension that came with that was the functional kind, the kind that sharpened focus rather than scattering it. Vrel appeared on the feed. He looked different. The sash was still in place. She had not expected them to remove the sash, and the aides were still flanking him. But one aide was new, someone who had not appeared in either previous transmission, holding a tablet and reading something on it with the expression of a person whose numbers were not arriving at a comfortable result, no matter how many times the calculation ran. And Vrel himself had a different quality. Not diminished, that was not the right word. Recalibrated was closer. Adjusted, like someone who had received a significant amount of new information and had not yet finished absorbing what all of it meant for their prior conclusions. "Commander Voss," he said. "Ambassador," she said. "We have completed a review of the survey data returned by our probe. I assumed you would." We have questions. I assumed that too. Crane leaned forward minimally, the professional diplomat's way of indicating engagement without crowding the exchange. The survey produced data inconsistent with our preliminary assessment of your civilization's developmental stage, Vrel said, in several significant respects. How so? Crane said. Vrel looked briefly at the new aide, who spoke something in the sovereignty's language that the translation bead caught only partially. Vrel continued, without waiting for a full translation bridge. The defense registry figure you transmitted during our initial exchange. Our analysts reviewed the documentation provided afterward. The figure is accurate. Yes, Sarah said. The aggregate does not correspond to any developmental profile in our classification system, at your current stage of technological advancement. Your classification system, Sarah said, was built on an incomplete data set regarding Earth. Vrel absorbed this. Our intelligence indicated that your civilization was engaged in ongoing internal conflicts, but had not developed the organizational coherence necessary for system-level coordinated defense. Sarah looked at him. Something moved through her, not toward the surface, but through a layer underneath the surface, where things lived that were older than this posting, and quieter, and not interested in being named right now. Your intelligence, she said, was counting the wrong things. Crane touched the edge of the console, his version of indicating he wanted the floor. She gave it. Ambassador, Crane said, the structure of Earth's defense is distributed across every nation. From an outside perspective, that reads as fragmented. What fragmented does not mean in our case is small, and it does not mean uncoordinated. It means every nation is independently responsible for its own defense capability, which means every nation has one. Every nation, Vrel said. 195 recognized sovereign states, Osei said from his position at the far console, reading from his screen, each with its own structure, each maintaining its own registration. The aide with the tablet had stopped whatever calculation was running. Everyone on the sovereignty side of the feed had gone still, in the way that happened when new information was landing faster than the framework built to receive it was able to absorb. The installation at the outer system boundary, Vrel said. He moved forward in the same way people moved when one piece of data was too large to finish processing in real time, setting it aside to circle back, continuing to the next point. The installation that disrupted our probe's transmission. What about it? Sarah said. What is it? A shipyard. Silence. How long has it been in operation? 11 years, she said. More silence. The kind where you could hear the calculation happening on the other end, even through the separation of a transmission channel. We have no record of that installation in our monitoring history of this system, Vrel said. Our long-range survey data over the past century found no evidence of any construction activity at that boundary location. It did not exist a century ago, Sarah said. It is 11 years old. All of it. Built in 11 years. The new aide said something quiet. Vrel listened, without turning toward the aide. His expression did not change in any way she could identify as clear, but something behind it was moving in a direction that was not comfortable. The debris field in the middle system, Vrel said. He said it with the same deliberateness Cole had used, and with a similar quality, like a door being approached rather than walked through. Our probe conducted an extended scan of the area. The energy signatures our systems detected there date back approximately 6 years. Our analysts classified the site as evidence of a significant armed engagement involving technology at or above our own operational level. The room on Sarah's side went quiet. Cole's hands on her keyboard stilled. Crane stopped leaning forward. Osei put his tablet flat on the surface of the console in front of him. Neely kept her eyes on her own screen but had stopped reading it. What happened there? Vrel asked. 8 seconds of silence on Sarah's end. She had learned over 13 years that 8 seconds was exactly long enough to be honest and short enough to stay controlled. That gap, between honesty and control, was where she lived most of the time. Navigational incident, she said. Flat. Even. The same 2 words as the report. The door stayed closed. She offered no apology for it. Vrel looked at her through the feed, and she watched something move through his face. Not disbelief, not dismissal, something more like recognition, the kind that understood a boundary when it encountered one, and had decided that the boundary was going to be respected. He nodded. Once. The nod of someone who had understood what they were looking at. I see, he said. She believed him. He looked down at something below the frame of the transmission for a moment. When he looked back up, the texture of his attention had changed again. He was looking at Sarah, not at Crane, at Sarah, specifically. I want to ask you something. Ask, she said. Our analysts spent 20 hours reviewing Earth's historical record after our initial exchange. It is an extensive record. Every era our data reaches. Every developmental stage. He paused. Your species has been in organized armed conflict for approximately 93% of your recorded history. Nobody on Sarah's side of the channel spoke. Every era, every technological stage, every political configuration our data describes, you have never, in all of your recorded history, fully demobilized, never reached a point where organized defense structures cease to exist. The pattern does not break. He paused again. Our analysts asked what should be, from any external analytical perspective, the natural question. The channel was quiet. You were not aware, until 6 weeks ago, that other civilizations existed, outside your own system, Vrel said. You had no confirmed external threat, no outside adversary that you knew about, no external force driving the preparation. He looked at her. 93%, without interruption, without a known target. He held her gaze. What were you preparing for? And Sarah laughed. Not the version she would have chosen. Not a calculated diplomatic move. Not a performance. Not anything she had prepared for this moment, because she had not prepared anything for this moment. It was simply the laugh that came out when something was so completely and precisely true that it bypassed every professional structure she had spent 13 years building, arriving fully formed through a door she had not known was there. 3 seconds of it. Real and helpless, and belonging entirely to the part of her that existed before ranks and reports and folders labeled noted. Then she pressed her hand flat on the console and looked at Vrel. The pen she had been rolling between 2 fingers through every briefing, and every transmission, and every hour of the past 31 hours, rolling it without quite noticing, the way hands needed something to do while a mind was working, went completely still. She looked at Vrel. Ambassador, she said, we did not know there were others out here. She let it sit for 1 full beat. We were preparing for each other. The silence that followed was not like the previous silences. The earlier ones had been the silence of recalculation, people updating a number, adjusting a projection, revising a figure in a model. This was something else. This was the sound of a framework being revised at a depth that went past data and into the underlying structure that held the data. Vrel's translation bead flickered. Once. A single brief interruption, like the technology needed a moment to catch up with what it had just been asked to carry across the distance between 2 very different sets of experience. She watched his face through the feed. She did not know his expression system with enough fluency to read it precisely, but she had been reading people for a long time, and what moved through his face in that moment was not confusion, not disbelief, not the careful blank of a diplomat managing difficult information. It was recognition, the kind that cost something to arrive at. I need to speak with the High Council, he said. His voice had a different texture now, more careful, the way someone's voice became when they had just realized that the ground they were standing on was different from the ground they had assumed it was, and they were now choosing each step with more attention. Take your time, Crane said. The channel closed. The briefing room was quiet. Cole was sitting very still against the wall. Osei had both hands flat on the table in front of him, touching nothing. Neely was looking at the window. Crane looked at Sarah. It was a different look than the one he had given her when she told him to patch through the first channel without authorization, and different from the one he had given her when she read the number. Something else had been added to it. You did not plan that, he said. No, she said. But you knew the answer. Everyone knows the answer, she said. It is just not usually the kind of thing you say to someone for whom it is surprising. Cole said, very quietly. His translator bead flickered. I saw, Sarah said. I have never seen that happen. Neither have I, Sarah said. She looked at the console. The form queue had 2 items left. She opened the first one and started typing. The planet below kept turning. Whatever Vrel was saying to the High Council of 47-member civilizations about a species that had spent its entire recorded history building itself up against itself, in a universe it did not know anyone else was sharing, that conversation was happening at whatever pace it needed to happen, and she had no useful role in it until it finished. She had 2 forms. She was going to finish them. We were preparing for each other. She thought about what that sounded like from the outside. She thought about 47 civilizations that had been trading and negotiating and managing their various concerns across centuries, and what they had decided humanity was when they found us, young, limited, internally conflicted, in need of structure and guidance, and a protective arrangement, and time to develop into something more predictable. She thought about what they were deciding now. She filled in field 2. Vrel's translation bead had flickered. Even the technology needed a second. The treaty took 11 days, not 72 hours. Not the original window that Vrel had arrived with, patient and certain of how it would be used. 11 days of formal transmission exchanges, structured documentation requests, 3 separate consultations with the full High Council, and at least 4 rounds of what were diplomatically described as clarification discussions, which were the kind of discussions that occurred when one party's analytical framework was not large enough to contain the other party, without significant restructuring at the foundation level. Each High Council consultation required new forms. Each clarification round produced new authorization requests. At least 3 additional officials arrived from Earth to support the negotiations, and each of them had to be introduced to the environmental control problem in the formal briefing chamber, which ran cold and remained cold because the maintenance request for it had been acknowledged and was pending a technician who was apparently occupied with other systems. They also had to be introduced to the coffee machine situation, which resolved itself on day 7 when the replacement part arrived and a technician fitted it within the hour. Sarah drank 3 cups in the first hour it was operational. The temperature was correct. She was not at the main table when the treaty was finally signed. She watched from the back of the formal signing chamber, arms crossed, jacket over her uniform because the chamber ran cold and the pending maintenance request had not been acted on. The chamber was full in the way formal occasions were full, the weight of attention oriented toward the central table, people arranged in the specific way that indicated something was about to be made permanent. The 3-wall display showed the 47 sovereignty member civilizations participating via transmission feed, each present in their formal configuration, witnessing. Vrel across the table from Crane, the sash in place, the new aide, the one with the tablet, present with a different tablet now, one that was producing fewer difficulties, the officials from Geneva and Washington and Beijing, sitting in a line with the documents positioned in front of each of them. The document they were signing was 48 pages in its human version. She had read it twice. The third time through, she had read only the sections she had directly contributed to, which was most of Article 12 and portions of Articles 7 and 9. The word protectorate did not appear anywhere in the final text. She had confirmed that on day 3, when the first complete draft arrived for review, she had made a note of the absence and filed it without comment. The term that appeared instead was Founding Security Partner, a new designation. The Sovereignty's legal team had spent 2 full days writing it, because no existing category in their law adequately described the situation, and they had been required to create one. In Sarah's experience, when an established system had to create a new category for something, it meant the system had genuinely encountered something outside its prior model. That was not a small thing. That was, in its own way, the thing. Article 12 outlined Earth's security commitments to other member civilizations. The commitments Earth was extending to the sovereignty, not the other direction. The sovereignty had arrived to offer Earth protection. Article 12 described what Earth was prepared to offer them. The number in Article 12 was the same number she had read to Vrel on the first day of contact. Crane signed, Neely signed, the Geneva officials signed, Vrel signed in the sovereignty's notation, a series of geometric marks on the display that looked like careful mathematics. The new aide witnessed it on the sovereignty's side. Osei witnessed it on the human side. Someone toward the back of the room began talking about a reception. Sarah left. She walked down the main corridor at 94% gravity, turned right at the junction where she would normally turn left. Left went to the operations deck and the console and the queue, and all the forms that would follow a treaty. Right went to the external observation bay that faced away from Earth, toward the outer system, and past the outer system, toward everything else. She stood at the window. The observation bay window had been fixed on day 9 of the negotiations, while she was in the middle of a clarification discussion on Article 7, and had not been there to see it done. She had come by afterward. The crack in the lower left corner was gone. The glass was clean and even. The structural report said, "Compliant." She had looked at it for a moment, and then gone back to work. She stood at the window now. She had filed a transport authorization request 2 weeks earlier, during a quiet 2-hour gap in negotiations, when the form queue was caught up. The authorization had cleared 6 days ago. Since then, she had found reasons to stay at her console. They were real reasons. She was not wrong about them. The negotiations had needed coverage and the forms had needed completion, and there had always been something in the queue. She stood at the window for several minutes and looked at the outer system. Then she went to the docking bay. The transport pilot was a young man named Will Hartley, 28, calm hands on the controls, and the quality of understanding that silence was often a more useful contribution than conversation. He had been assigned to this transport assignment 3 days ago and had not yet asked Sarah a single question she had not explicitly opened the door to. The flight to the Kepler debris field took 4 hours. She spent the first hour on her tablet. The environmental control maintenance request for the formal signing chamber had been downgraded from medium to low priority by the facilities team. She wrote a counter document. She made it thorough. She submitted it with the urgency designation and a supporting note explaining the frequency of high-level use and the temperature's effect on the extended meetings that had been taking place there. She also checked on the thermos clip request, which had been sitting at low priority for 7 years. She did not escalate it. She looked at it in the list for a moment, and then moved past it. She spent the second hour looking out the port window at the outer system. It was dark the way space was always dark, which was not the absence of light so much as the distance between lights. Things were far apart out here. That was the primary fact about space. Everything was very far apart, and the distance between things was not empty so much as it was the place where nothing had yet accumulated. She had spent enough time in it to have stopped finding it hostile. It was the context. The place where things happened or did not happen, where signals traveled their distance or got lost, where a probe found too much to process, and a debris field held its position unchanged for 6 years, because nothing in the distance between things pushed it anywhere. She spent the third hour working on a document she had been building incrementally across the negotiations. The Kuiper Belt facility's status was now changing under Article 9 of the new treaty, and the documentation needed to be current and comprehensive and submitted before the 30-day implementation window began. She added 3 sections. She flagged 2 items for additional review and made a note to pull in the authorization level that would let her close them. She closed the tablet when the debris field appeared on the nav display. It came up as a scatter of color-coded flags, the sensor system organizing a wide area of distributed objects into something navigable. The spread looked manageable on the display. It was large in practice. She had known the dimensions from the incident data. She had known them for 6 years. She had not been here to hold the dimensions against the actual place. "Slow down," she said. Hartley slowed the transport. He did not ask why. They moved through the outer edge of the field at reduced approach speed. The sensors were reading the energy signatures, 6 years old and unchanged, the kind of record that did not fade on any timeline relevant to human experience. She looked at the sensor display first, and then looked out the observation port at the field itself. The field was quiet, the way space was always quiet. Nothing burning, nothing moving fast, nothing performing any part of what had happened here. The debris held whatever position it had settled into, and it stayed there, because nothing was pushing it anywhere else, and nothing was pulling it anywhere else, and it would stay that way for a period of time that made 6 years feel like a brief pause. She had expected it to feel larger. It did not feel larger. It felt accurate, and that was something, and she held on to that. "Hold position," she said. Hartley held. She looked at the field. The distribution of objects, the energy signature patterns visible on the sensor display, the wide, quiet scatter of things that had been other things 6 years ago, before a 12-minute assessment became a 4-minute reality, before the difference between those 2 numbers became a shape, before the shape became a location she had been meaning to visit for 6 years, and finding reasons not to. She had written the word navigational twice, and submitted the file, and not opened it since. She was here now. Hartley flagged the hull plate on the nav display 23 minutes into the hold. Larger than most of the surrounding debris, a slow, stable rotation rate, the orientation that brought its marked face around on a legible angle at regular intervals. He showed her on the screen without speaking. She located it through the observation port. The ship's name, standard designation lettering, the same font used on every Earth military vessel she had been associated with across 13 years of postings, clean and professional and plain, not a person's name. The ship's name, the ship whose crew had existed in the gap between 12 minutes and 4 minutes, in the space where everything she had not been able to do in the time she did not have, had happened anyway without her. She looked at it until the rotation took the name away. She waited. It came back. She read it again. She was holding the thermos she had brought from the station, the one she had bought 11 years ago, at a commissary on a posting that was not this one, when this posting did not yet exist, and the Kepler engagement was not yet something that had happened. She had been carrying it across 3 postings and 4 reassignments. The clip on the handle had broken in year 4. She had added it to the maintenance request list at irregular intervals for 7 years and never escalated it, because escalating it would move it toward resolution, and resolution would take it off the list, and something in her had wanted it to stay on the list. She had not examined why until tonight, standing in the hold position over the field, and now she understood why. She held the thermos with both hands. Not drinking from it, just holding it, because her hands needed something to hold, and the thermos was what she had brought, and it was the right thing. The name rotated away with the slow mechanical pace of physics. She had nothing prepared to say. She had not tried to prepare anything, had not known on the transit out what words would be adequate, and standing here now she understood that there were no adequate words, and that understanding was itself a kind of answer. You could be here, and look and read the name, and hold the thermos, and not say anything. And that was complete. It had to be complete. It was the only version available. The thermos was cold against her palms. The name came back with the rotation. She read it once more. Then she watched it go. "Hartley," she said. "Commander. Take me home." He turned the transport without comment. Calm hands. New heading. She sat in the forward seat and watched the debris field recede on the nav display. The flagged objects becoming smaller. The cluster of notation becoming a notation. Then the display's resolution passed it, and the field was gone from the screen, and there was only the heading line pointing back toward the station. She opened the thermos. The coffee inside was cold. She had made it before the signing ceremony, and then not touched it through the ceremony, or the walk to the docking bay, or the 4-hour flight out. She drank it cold. Cold coffee was still coffee, and she had been short on it for 11 days. Hartley flew. She drank the cold coffee, and thought about the treaty, and everything that came after it. About Article 12, and the number in it, and what it meant, for 47 civilizations that had been operating in this galaxy for centuries, without knowing what was sitting at the edge of an unremarkable system, counting down from different kinds of clocks. About the other civilizations, the ones under sovereignty protection, some for centuries, some for decades, all accustomed to a particular arrangement of safety that had been the only arrangement they knew. They had received, over the past week, a quiet administrative notification that Earth's registration number was now listed as a co-guarantor on their existing security agreements. Nobody had asked Earth to do that. Sarah had completed the Article 12 documentation herself, filed it through the standard authorization channels, and it had cleared 3 approval levels in less than 24 hours. Someone above her had been waiting for it to arrive, and had moved it the moment it did. She was glad they had not required her to request permission first. She would have done it either way. She thought about Vrel, about a conversation on day 8, when he had found her in the corridor between 2 meetings and asked, in careful imperfect English without the translation bead, whether she had been afraid. She had given the question the same attention she gave forms, complete, in order, making sure the answer was right before she committed to it. No, she had said. Then, because he had earned the honest version, tired, he had nodded. Not the diplomatic nod of someone acknowledging a position, the other kind, the kind that came from understanding that tired was not a lesser state than afraid. That in certain contexts, tired was the heavier thing, because afraid finished eventually, and tired did not. She had respected him more for that nod than for anything else that had happened across 11 days of negotiation. The station appeared on the nav display, growing from a notation to a cluster, to a visible structure through the forward port. The lights, the activity, the specific organized presence of 12,000 people doing their operational lives on a structure in space. The ordinary work of maintenance and monitoring and communication that kept the things that needed to stay up, staying up. Cole was probably at her console. Osei was probably with Crane's team managing the post-signing documentation, which was its own substantial body of work. Neely was probably 3 steps ahead of whatever came next, which was where Neely tended to be. The planet below was turning at its own pace, which was the same pace it had always turned at, indifferent to treaties and transmission windows, and the particular math that happened when one species told another what it had been doing with all its time. Hartley docked the transport with the calm efficiency of someone who was good at the thing they were asked to do. "Welcome home, Commander," he said. She picked up her bag. The thermos clinked against her tablet inside. The clip on the handle was still broken. She had looked at the list item for it on the transit out, and not escalated it. She thought she might, on the next review. Not today, but soon. The list was for things you intended to act on eventually, and she intended to act on it eventually. That was why it was on the list. She walked down the docking corridor into the main station. The 94% gravity settled around her at the familiar weight, the particular pressure of this posting that had become indistinguishable from her own mass. She had noticed it on the flight back, the slight difference of the transport's standard gravity versus the station's adjusted field, and she had felt the station's weight return when she crossed the docking threshold, the way you felt something familiar return when you had been away from it. She turned left at the junction, toward the main operations deck, toward her console. The queue had 4 new items. An Article 9 implementation notice for the Kuiper Belt Facility Survey. This one expected. She had been anticipating it since day 5 of negotiations. A follow-up authorization for the co-guarantor registrations under Article 12. Also expected. A routine communications log for the past 48 hours, and a maintenance completion notice for the observation bay window, which had been addressed during the signing ceremony period while she was in the chamber watching Crane sign and Vrel sign and the geometric marks appear on the display. She looked at the maintenance completion notice, the crack in the lower left corner. Compliant now. She made a note in the operational log and filed it. She opened the coffee machine, poured a cup. The temperature was correct. She had confirmed this on day 7 when the machine was repaired, and the temperature had been correct since. She drank it. The planet below kept turning. The stars outside the observation bay window, the sealed one, structural integrity confirmed, no crack in the lower left corner anymore, were the same stars they had always been, the same distances, the same ancient light that had been traveling longer than anything on Earth had been alive to receive it. But they felt different, the way a room felt different, after you understood its history. Not larger, not smaller, more specific, more real. The way things became real, when you had traveled to their location, held the thermos, read the name, waited for the rotation. Not threats, not mysteries. Work. She had never, in 38 years, been afraid of work. She opened the first form, clicked into the first field, and began.